Welcome to the Medical Alley webinar series, What Now, What Next? I'm Shay Mandel. I'm the President and CEO of the Medical Alley Association. Today's episode is the new normal, caring for your team and keeping your culture intact. And for our audience, I'd like to remind you that you can use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best as the conversation moves along to address your questions. I am thrilled to have the panel that we have with us today. Today we have Dale Cook, co-founder and CEO of Learn to Live, Kathleen Scarvan, President and CEO of Electromed, and Matt Walter, VP of Human Resources for Medtronic Diabetes. We know we're all living in unprecedented times. We no longer occasionally work from home. We now live where we work. Employees are dealing with new levels of stress and anxiety, and organizations are trying to support employees and retain their cultures on the fly with no real playbook for what's happening. So today, we want to talk about that. First, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do a brief introduction of themselves, and then we're going to jump into the conversation. And Dale, why don't we start with you? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Shay, and thanks for having all of us on today. I'm Dale Cook, co-founder and CEO of Learn to Live. We provide mental health care services both online and then via live with coaches as well.
Kathleen?
I'm Kathleen Scarvan. I'm the president and CEO of Electromed Incorporated. We design, develop, and manufacture, also sell, an airway clearance therapy called high-frequency chest wall oscillation, serving people primarily in the home care environment if they have chronic lung function issues. So happy to be here today.
Thank you. And Matt?
Yeah, thanks for having me today. So Matt Walter, I lead our human resource function for diabetes business within Medtronic, and we are a large, multinational medical device company.
Fantastic. Well, let's get to it. So Dale, Learn to Live is right in the middle of this mental health crisis. It's what you do. So I'd love to ask you, just set the table for this conversation and share some of the data, what you're seeing today. Get us rolling.
Well, happy to do that. I think, Shay, you said it pretty well at the beginning. I mean, here we all are on a Zoom, not in person, right? Working from home. That becomes for many a 24/7 endeavor. Some face financial or economic uncertainty. Some have been involved in layoffs, or their companies are doing layoffs and their colleagues are impacted. Stress is really kind of spilling over in many, many ways. We're all dealing with social distancing and things like caution fatigue in the mental health realm. That's a very relevant piece. Childcare, we haven't even talked about that, or distance learning, or making those decisions for kids. And for many of us, self-care becomes kind of the last thing on the list, and that's slipping. And so I think broadly speaking, thinking about kind of statistically, the CDC has been doing a lot of studying in the past 5 or 6 months. And certainly there's a lot of concern with things on the mental health front, fear, worry about your health or loved one's health, loss of support services. Certainly there's a meaningful increase in substance use, feelings of isolation, fatigue. It's exacerbating chronic health conditions. And in fact, in our work at Learn to Live, and also more broadly with the CDC, there's evidence indicating in some cases, for example, with depression, that there's 4 times an increase in depression and anxiety for Americans right now. And so I know I opened a lot there, Shay, with a lot of sort of stormy cloud kind of information. I think I would add just finally, before pausing, that a big positive in all of that is we're also finding, though, that in talking about it like this, people are having great empathy for each other, because many people for the first time are beginning to learn what anxiety really feels like, that maybe have understood it, but they haven't experienced it. And so in the work that we do, we're often finding that whether our health plan clients or organizational clients, some leaders or sponsors are even saying, wow, I can really understand this for the first time. And so we're finding, a lot of advocates in the work that we do. And now more than ever, it's important that we help each other. I don't know if that was too detailed, Shay, or help set the stage enough for that.
I love it. Definitely set the stage. And I think the dark, stormy cloud part of this is, why we have such a huge audience for this webinar. And again, thanks everyone for their attendance. Everyone's dealing with issues. So, the positive part of this is that we're talking about it. And I know that's always a mental health theme, but mental health, is hitting everybody and organizations. So part of, what we want to talk about today on the positive, giving people hope is, we've got 3 leaders here that are fully committed to supporting their teams and seeing that in an environment that, again, we did not plan for. Also 3 great corporate cultures that are committed to keeping the core of their organizations moving forward, which is incredibly important right now, given these are healthcare leaders who, every day are saving lives and improving people's lives. So let's talk about first that approaching, supporting and caring for your team, right? I mentioned, we no longer work from home. We live where we work. So Kathleen, I'd love to ask you, kick it off. I mean, how are you supporting and just caring for that team in these times?
Yeah, thank you, Shay. Before I answer that question, I wouldn't mind just giving just a little history here of how we came through this situation. Of course, we're not at the end of this situation relative to the pandemic, but early on, I would say back in February, there were really 3 keys to how Electromed continued to operate through the pandemic and with uninterrupted service to our patients. And it started first by recognizing we're a tier 1 organization defined by the federal government, essential business, because we provide a therapy that keeps people out of the hospital. And right now, at that time, March, April, June, May, it was so essential that we keep as many people out of the hospital as possible. Early in February, I spent easily 15 to 20 hours a week immersing myself in understanding everything I could about COVID-19. Who were the experts that I would follow with the highest quality information, current information, because there just was a lot of misinformation and a lot of lack of information. And then I think finally, and I think this speaks to culture, myself and the senior leadership, and I really believe all employees at Electromed had a conviction, because we are such a mission-driven culture around the patient, that we would continue to operate. We would do it safely. We wanted to protect our employees' #1 job, but everyone wanted to continue working and serving our patients and helping them with our airway clearance therapy. And so through that effort, that really set the stage for how we were going to operate. And I don't think you do that without having a pretty strong established culture around that mission and around how we work together as a team. And so I have to say that started us out on the right foot. When it comes to how we operate now, since we do manufacture here in New Prague, Minnesota, those individuals continued to work throughout the pandemic. We never stopped manufacturing, but we invested in how to keep people safe, what the best science was around keeping them safe. And again, we're a small organization, we're very nimble, so that helps us to work on the fly as well with changing policies, not having such detailed policies, but higher level policies that then we could adapt as we needed to. And but about 70% of our workforce here in New Prague does work remotely, and they love it. They absolutely love it. I will say though, they do miss how we would recognize people in the past. Like you might have a Halloween party. We always have an annual Halloween party. We dress up. We have a potluck. No longer will we do that. But we just had a discussion about how can we do that virtually? How can we make sure everyone dresses up and we take pictures, or we get together and we eat together then and everybody has their own potluck. Those are ways we're maintaining that culture. The other thing that we found was very important was senior leadership communication on that culture. And so I more frequently communicated to people via email for the most part, but we also then would have our all employee meetings too, and also leadership team meetings more frequently, and pulse surveys that would give information back to us about what was working, what wasn't, and how we could continue to adjust on the fly. So, but always with the employee being number one and how we could keep them safe and well. So one more that I'll add, I don't want to take up too much time here, but I years ago sent birthday cards to everyone. So I have reinitiated that practice that I send birthday cards to everyone with a handwritten note. And we have 120 employees. I know Medtronic, that would be a little hard, but if there's any way you can establish something like that so that people are receiving handwritten notes at home that their families see too, I think that really keeps people engaged. Thank you.
We said we were going to make sure we had the positive out here. Well, Matt, Kathleen did mention Medtronic. Of course, you guys, there's a scale significantly different. You've got workers in a lot of different categories in a lot of different places. Walk us through how you have approached doing this on the scale that you have to at Medtronic.
Yeah, it's something we had to take into consideration very early on. We're in about 170 countries around the world, 100,000 employees. So it gets complex very quickly. And I think like Kathleen's company, we established a framework, guiding principles, if you will, at the very beginning of this to say, we need something that we can always tack back to make sure that, every decision that we make is aligned with how we want to run and how we want the employees ultimately to experience their time at Medtronic. And so we put in a three-part framework as well. The first one was really focused on the health and wellness of our employees and their families, and that was always a top priority. Throughout the last 6 to 8 months, as again every decision we make around how we operate, both now near term and in the short term ahead. Making sure that was always the top priority. Secondly, again, similar to the other companies, established that, look, we're a mission-driven company. And at the end of the day, we got to make sure that our therapy gets to our patients. And so that will require some tough decisions to make sure that happens. But we need to make sure that we withhold and hold up our mission as, why we're here, and make sure that the patients get our devices and our technology that they need to live. And then thirdly, also recognizing our standing as a global multinational company, and we want to be a good corporate citizen through this. So how do you do the right thing? How do you take into account, the communities that you do business in and that you employ in, and make sure that you're serving those communities? And obviously there's huge variance in how this unfolded across the world. So even despite having that framework, it got complex, very quickly. But it's been a great framework to leverage, and I think we stayed true to it, and lived what we set out to do from the very beginning. And we've put in, whether it's employee-based programs to help support, our employees, whether it's protecting our manufacturing and de-risking by removing all other employees from the situation, and whether it's looking at our communities and helping serve in those communities in different ways. We've built programs. And in some cases practices, to help support all three of those pillars. And like the others, we've also seen a huge variance in this, right? You've got a continuum. You've got folks that I would say today are in crisis mode. They're struggling for one reason or another, the mental health, the pressure of work, not being able to carve out the difference between, work and life. There's no escape for a lot of them. And on the other end of the continuum, we've got people that are thriving through this, right? We've got people that have been waiting for this moment to kind of prove themselves, to say, look, I've been telling you for 5 years I can do this remotely, right? And here's the proof. And they're just, again, they're thriving in the moment. And how do you reconcile all of that, right? And across such a broad population and diverse population. And that's kind of the everyday, discussions and debates that I think we're having today.
Well, I definitely want to pick up on that as we go through the conversation, sort of how you're thinking about this conversation going forward. But Dale, I also want to give you a chance. So you don't have manufacturing. You don't have this differentiation of workers. You also have, I presume, inside the organization, a tremendous amount of pressure to support your team, in part because you're in the support mental health business. So what have you guys been doing? What's your philosophy been to support your team during these changes?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, the irony of that, right, is certainly not lost on our team. I think similar to what Matt and Kathleen have shared, we tend to attract a really mission-driven, highly talented team of people that work at Learn to Live. And we, as really still a healthcare startup, we run pretty lean, but we're in the midst of, experiencing tremendous growth. So if you combine really mission-oriented people, a mission-driven culture, high growth, running pretty lean, that can be a pretty tricky recipe if you're in the midst of all this pandemic complication and anxiety. So I think for us, I mean, part of it has been, a number of things. I think as Matt and Kathleen have talked about, there's sort of the practical side of it for us, which has been everything from the practical tools of thinking, how do you lead at work, like manage people in the midst of anxiety? How do you lead at home? Like, what's your role at home, especially when these two are combined? This office is about 15 feet from my bedroom, and I love what I do, but clearly that creates complication when my commute is so short. I have to be really careful, right, about my balance. And then I think the third thing is this concept of self-care, which really isn't new, but it's very important. So I think at Learn to Live, we do try to apply the tools that we teach our members and we work with our clients on. And that's anything from, like in our case, this kind of superhero mentality our team might have, given the mission-driven orientation that, it's important to take off your cape and you have to take care of yourself and you have to let other people take care of you. So part of it for us is making sure there are literally, virtual spaces and times to give each other permission to talk about the things that they're struggling with or find ways to have those conversations and keep that very open. I think another thing, and these are sort of practical, mental health tools we talk about, but this idea of controlling what you can and encouraging, everybody on our team has different situations. Some kids are in school, some aren't, some have like 6 pets. Some are single and don't have pets, but maybe they have a parent living with them and it's a very different situation. And so we try and think about what are those things you can control. And then sometimes it becomes, really as practical as, for example, for us in our goal setting as a company, historically, we tend to do kind of company goals, we do team goals, we do individual goals, right? And we're in the midst of our 2021 goal planning. So we're doing that, but we're also doing the reverse this year. So we're layering on what are your individual goals specific to managing during this really intense time personally? What are your goals for managing your self-care, your family and friends, and your work? And it starts at the individual, we roll that up to the team, and then we roll that up to the company. So we almost have 2 different, but very, very important goal setting mechanisms that we're combining this year because, we're sort of, digging in that this may be a while, right? We probably need to assume that for our mental health. And so we're trying to find these very practical ways that we can kind of keep managing this thing and keep our sanity, if I can say it that way.
One of the things I hear you all talking about is, the difference between having a support infrastructure in place, as all of you did before, versus proactively delivering support. And I think that it seems to be a fundamental change in how I see leaders and all of you tackling these challenges. So I'd love for all of you, some comments around that shift from providing support to proactively delivering support. And then, I think as part of our positive today, you got a bunch of people going through the same things as you guys. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in, supporting your team? And what are some of the things, and, you can reaffirm if you've mentioned them, that are really working? I mean, are there some takeaways for folks watching?
Maybe,
yeah,
I'll start on that, Shay. I think that one of the roles of leaders, I believe, in this time is to project confidence and stability. And it is not my role necessarily to take care of people, but we certainly understand that this is unprecedented, as you said, and the number of mental health issues or concerns that employees bring forward about their work and their ability to do it certainly has picked up. And so we need to be more empathetic, I think would be a good phrase, more tolerant for individuals that are going to have daycare issues or they can't get their workspace quite set up the way they want to. But we also know that we still have a job to do. And so we work together on that. I think that's more collaborative maybe than it might have been in the past for the reasons that we're all talking about here. But I think a leader's job, though, is still to create stability and something that people can count on. Because if you can count on going to work every day, a lot of things take care of themselves. If you can count on getting that paycheck and you have confidence in your leadership of your company and that your company is going to continue to provide a product to those patients that need it, like ours do, it really makes a difference for people because that they can count on then. And even those things might be a little more challenging in their personal life, it's maybe a little easier to deal with and we can help support them on that. So we've always talked about how we coexist with the pandemic and COVID-19. We have to all adapt and learn how to do that. I would say the challenge that we had, the largest challenge I think we had really was with our sales team. So our sales team operates all over the United States, not necessarily globally, but all over the United States. And they had a belief that they were quarantined, that they could not continue to work other than through a phone call. And so I find this to be, when I talk to other business leaders, one of the most challenging issues is that if you were not operational during the entire pandemic, and now you're starting to ask people to come back to work or come back into the office when they hadn't been in for 6 months, it's really scary. And that's, I think, what we've dealt with, people being fearful of contracting the COVID-19 virus. And so how do we help give them confidence that we're putting safety measures in, or we're not going to ask them to do something that puts them in jeopardy? Up there.
Well, I'll maybe jump in on that, Shay. I think in the beginning you said we were allowed to do that, but you'll check me if I'm
encouraged.
You know, I resonate with some of what Kathleen is sharing. I think, you know, we have found sort of the leadership team and having a certain degree of stability and, you know, ability to kind of lead. But as part of that, you know, I'd layer in that transparency piece to it as well, where I think our team has been exceptional about, you know, being strong and having, showing great leadership and a point of view and stability, but also transparency that we're all, you know, we're really in this together and we have to figure it out together. And I think like Kathleen said too, you know, a number of people on our team are pretty accustomed to face-to-face interactions and that's part of their role. And so, you know, trying to think about how do they do that virtually and now, you know, at what point might they start to travel? And again, to Kathleen's point, you know, people, you know, we're finding, and it's natural, people have different levels of risk tolerance. And so we've learned that we have to really carefully navigate that. You know, someone on our team who's an exceptional, you know, salesperson and partnerships builder loves to travel and is exceptional at the face-to-face interaction, but also, you know, legitimately has concerns, understandably concerns about health, right? And so we want to be careful to not, I don't want to unwittingly put pressure on that person by over enthusiastically supporting their travel if they're really, they don't want to do it. So I think it's sort of learning along the way to where the guardrails are for, you know, how to make people feel really comfortable that, you know, we'll find a way to do this and we've got your back and, you know, we'll find a way for you to do your job and it's not necessarily business as usual.
That's really well said, Dale. I agree with you that that's exactly how we need to conduct ourselves with our people because those fears are legitimate.
Mm-hmm. I would tackle the question probably. Maybe there's 3 phases I'd look through. I think at the very beginning, the most difficult thing was probably just logistical of getting, you know, 40,000 employees, you know, out of the offices, out of the sites, and getting them home. And I say 40,000 because the other 40 to 50,000 had to remain on site for you know, operations, manufacturing, quality reasons. So just logistically, at the very beginning of this, it was just the infrastructure and getting them kind of established in a remote environment. And I think we moved through that phase kind of quickly. I think the phase that we're in now is, look, there's just a galaxy of needs out there, right? And there's no one size fits all to this thing. Every employee, and you heard some of the examples. I mean, some folks need help with childcare and, the kids that are being schooled, in distance learning right now. Some need flexible work hours. I've got probably 25% of the population that's like banging the door to get back in the building, right? They're ready to go back. And whether that's because they're distracted at home, you get the call, it's like, hey, I've got a spouse, I've got 5 kids, I've got 3 pets. I need like a sanctuary, right? To be able to focus. On the other end of that spectrum, you've got folks that are, working 8-10 hours a day from a studio apartment off of their bed. And that's not conducive to a great work environment either, right? And so you've got people ready to come back. And on the other end, you've got a 20% of the population that says they're never coming back, right? And so there's just this, diverse set of needs out there. And going into it, you can't satisfy everybody. So how do you prioritize, where you're going to invest and how you're going to kind of manage through that, right? And then I think going forward, as you heard from the others, this is going to be, we've got some very positive, feedback from employees from a safety perspective, from how leaders have been leading through this challenge, even from some of the operational metrics, financial, hitting our operating plans. So all that's been fantastic. We're hitting all-time highs on things like our employee engagement. So how do you preserve all that, but also knowing that we have to figure out how to sustain this for the long term? And for things like R&D, for example, or product innovation, we've got to get teams back together. It's just, we're getting things out the door today that are in the short term, but for long-term success, we've got to figure something different out. And I think that's the challenge in the next phase of this.
So one question that we have seen trickle in from the audience, and I had touched base with you all a little bit, it seems as though during this, I mean, you're seeing, and not necessarily in a bad way, right? But all of the divisions of all of our employees, right? Different lives, different risk tolerance, even different perspectives on, the dangers of COVID-19, right? Those who are like, whatever, it's fine, it's the flu, and other people, who really have, concern about the impact. So you got a lot of different views. You've got essential employees, people that have to be in a facility, Matt and Kathleen, and then others who can work from home. And, even before this, right, always the internal challenges of, why does this person get to be at home when they want to, and why don't I get to? So, with all that diversity of challenges, how are you managing all of that while still, really keeping that singular, unique culture? How are you guys working that? And is that, maybe the better question is, are you finding that to be a significant challenge going forward, that you've got so many different divisions, I'll say, caused by the pandemic among your workforce?
The answer is yes, Shay. My humor's off in the afternoon. I better be careful about that. I certainly would say, we have found it more challenging. I think, you lose that interpersonal, like physical in-person dimension and all the nonverbal, cues, there's the Zoom fatigue. So, there's all of that becomes more complex to manage. And, it's an election year, right? So I think all of us can probably relate to these stressors that aren't even pandemic related. They get layered in on top. I think one thing that we try to do, again, in the spirit of sort of a mental health tactic, which is focusing on things you can control, is one of the things we do as a team is we try to share ideas about things we're doing individually or at home or as a family or with our work and the way we manage it, that, we're trying things. And if it's working, we're encouraging each other to share ideas. Similarly, we sort of trial different concepts that we can turn around then and use with our health plan clients for their members, or our employer clients, or university clients. And so it's turning some of these challenges into opportunities to take action and do something with it, with the team. to turn around and potentially benefit other people. And I know that's probably a little specific to our business and an advantage that we have. But this notion of sort of taking action, and then literally once a week as a team, we touch base on kind of this very open-ended, kind of non-work related conversation to talk about these things. But it does take work because it's now a formal kind of process that every week we talk about the informal things we're doing to cope, if that makes sense.
So certainly it is challenging. I think that it's challenged us really to be more creative and be more innovative about how we work with employees, how we communicate with employees, how we manage the culture, as you were saying. Early on, myself and the senior leadership established a weekly COVID-19 meeting. I think we should change the title of it, but we still meet on a regular basis. And that's where all the issues bubble up that we've heard from employees during the week, or other new information that's come in from science. How do we manage the regulations and the orders that may come out from the governor? And that really has been a really important reason why we've been able to continue to adapt and adjust and keep in touch with our employees, is through the leadership team meeting and bubbling up. I think every employee relations issue, and again, we have a small organization, 120, it makes it much simpler, don't get me wrong, I hear about and I'm involved in. And so we can deal with that very quickly through my human resources director and the leader of that employee. And it could be this person is not able to work from 2 to 4 because they have to watch their children. So they're working early morning, late evening. Okay, how do we accommodate that? This individual just isn't comfortable coming into the office once a week even for a weekly leadership meeting. Okay, how do we deal with that? We have a salesperson that not comfortable visiting clinics. How do we deal with that? So we take them one off, and then through that you develop a model, I believe, of how to deal with it in the future. So that's been really working for us well. I'm not saying that'll work for every company, but for smaller organizations, if you can stay that involved, that nimble, that flexible, and really hear all the issues, I think it keeps leadership more informed, but also more empathetic and understanding how flexible we need to be and how well we need to work with those employees to help them solve some of these more challenging issues. But it comes back to communication again and being visible. And this week, I have started to reach out through Microsoft Teams, which is what we use for remote people, and contact 2 or 3 people a week just to reach out and say, hello, how you doing? And I think that's going to be really interesting and also shows that engagement and that family-oriented culture that we continue to perpetuate.
I think for us, it's just an awareness of, what parts of our culture going into this that we want to preserve, right? And so for us, to recognize, look, we're a high performing, but also a very high trust organization. And so as we made decisions through the, pandemic in terms of how we wanted to operate, like, for example, there was a lot of questions around productivity and do we want to, quote, monitor in some way? And decisions like, no, we don't. We trust our employees, they trust us, and ultimately we'll get our work done, right? So I think it was really that upfront conversation around, what culture do we have and how do we preserve it? How do we make decisions that are aligned to it in order to do that? I think going forward, the challenge, and we actually just had some conversations with our CEO and our executive committee even this week around this, which is, I think we're coming to an inflection point where we've kind of started, we've been managing on a surface level, right? So we've increased communication, we left leaders locally, kind of manage the situation. But, I think there's 2 things that we believe to be true. One is, we're never going back to pre-COVID, right? I mean, we're going to land in a more hybrid work environment going forward. And secondly, this isn't going to be over. The current state's not going to be over in the next month or 2 or the next quarter or 2, right? We're probably going to be in a pretty tightly managed situation a year from now. So we have to take additional steps, more, deeper steps in the organization to, change the way work is done, put stricter boundaries in place if necessary, but really, take a more thoughtful and disciplined approach to preserving and creating the culture that we do need, not just for today, but really for where the end state of all this is. And so I think those are the conversations we will start having shortly.
Matt, I love that you kind of identified, this conflict moment. And I think, all crises present an opportunity to take a step back and, both look in the mirror, but evaluate everything that you're doing. And this certainly is doing that for all of us. So, one question for all of you, as you've been doing that, are you learning something new about your corporate culture? Are you finding some changes that you're really embracing that you would not have otherwise, besides the forced distributed work? But what are you learning about your corporate culture that you think will empower you to be a stronger leader as we move forward?
I'll jump up. I mean, you took the one off the table that was the most obvious to us, which is, I think before there was some very traditional views around where and how work got done, and those have been blown up, right? And so we're starting from new ground, and I think that's a huge positive for us. But I think to one step forward, we it's actually a positive, which is when you actually get momentum and you actually get a force behind something. I think we realize we can actually move pretty quickly, and that's not a characteristic that you would typically assign to a large, 100,000 multinational company. I mean, there's a lot of risk in moving quickly, right? And things have to be buttoned up. But ultimately, when push came to shove, and just give you one example, we have a building down in San Antonio, which is one of our call centers, and we got 2,000 employees in there, and within a week we had them set up, we had them had desks, IT was enabled. I mean, it was just like, you in a normal operating environment, you couldn't have got that done, right? So there's something there to be said to say, hey, look, we are able to, when we focused, get this done and get it done in a hurry, right? So why can't that just be more of the norm? Why would it take 6 months to do that in a normal operating environment? And then the second one I just added is just to say, look, I think we've been more deliberate about prioritizing work, right? I think we all realize that if we focus, we can do anything, but we can't do everything, especially right now. And so what is the capacity of the organization, and what can they handle, and really helping shepherd the organization through that part. And that's something where we always say prioritization, and we put new stuff on the board, but we've never taken stuff off the board, right? And that's always been our problem. And I've actually seen it change where we're actually committed to taking stuff off of the to-do board and the to-do list, to make sure there's capacity and space and breathing room and oxygen for our teams to run. So.
I'd add to Matt's comment, prioritization, I think, is a great one. And that's been one for us too. I think, especially sort of in a startup and environment and a highly innovative area of healthcare that we're in, it is that the key, the trick's always choosing the best 3 ideas out of 100, right? But, we tend to do like, well, let's do the best 18 out of 100 because we can do it. And I think this has forced us to be more diligent and more intentional, even in our strategic plan. We revised our strategic plan for Q4 primarily around this issue, or it was one of the key issues, which was how do we eliminate certain things and make those tough decisions so that we're sure to have some personal time and sure to do that self-care. So we're not, because we know we're going to run hard anyway, but how do we actually limit the number of tasks as a process, as a guardrail to actually try and find a little bit better balance. I think that's been a big one. And then, like Matt, I would agree, we're finding tremendous efficiency. So in as much as our team loves to see each other, and I would argue not everybody, but a lot of people like to see each other in person, and our team certainly does. There's a lot that can get done. And, silver linings, like, all that commute time is cut out, right? So if you can use that productively, either for work or for self-care, that can be a huge advantage. And we're learning that too.
So I will say that I always felt that we had a culture of engagement, and I come to find out we weren't nearly as engaged as I thought I was, or we were. And what I mean by that is I always thought we were listening to the employees and taking their ideas into account, that they were helping us form our strategy and our goals, and we're all committed. And I come to find out that now that we're all working, more people are working from home, and we found it could work, I'm just rethinking how engaged I really was in the leadership team with our people. And we're finding that we have a lot to work on, and we have so much more we can improve on. And we've got the opportunity now because they are working from home and it's something they wanted to do for a long time, certain groups, and they're doing it so well. No more office politics, no more people walking around and bothering you so you can really get your work done. And so the lesson for me is that we need to work on listening to our people much more carefully and take their ideas into consideration. Maybe they're not always something that I think is right, but how could you pilot it? How could you try it to see how it might work so that they feel like they have a say in how we do our work? So that certainly is a takeaway from me, and we're really working on figuring out how to do that better as we go forward.
And by the way, thank you for just saying that as directly, Kathleen. I mean, I love that all of you are, kind of laying out the experiences. And I know that, there are hundreds of people right now watching this saying, that's how I feel, right? I think we all aspire and always have to run organizations with great culture that are completely engaged with our employees, a place that is diverse and equitable and inclusive. And, I think we've had for the last 6 months, the opportunity to see in real time where, we've fallen short as leaders. And I do think it creates an opportunity for us to continue to move that culture. I'll ask, I'll say a more practical sort of implication of this. So you've all talked about, we're not going back to the way we were. And Matt specifically talking about how quickly that transition happened in San Antonio. So, looking out over the next few years, or even just as you see your future business, I mean, what does the brick and mortar workplace look like, if at all? What is that landscape going to look like? Do you see your company making continued investments in the softer skills and technology for people to work remotely? What does sort of the picture look like for your company over the next few years?
I'll start. So we just finished an expansion about a year ago here in New Prague, and it's empty. And but what we have found is I'm not concerned about it. It was a really good return on investment based on leasing a building that we had, and we got a great cafeteria for all of our employees here out of it, where we were going to hold all of our employee meetings. But it's just still a beautiful facility, and I suspect we will utilize it going forward at some point and to some capacity. But we have had trouble recruiting professionals into New Prague, as you can imagine. No one likes to drive across the river south for some reason. And what we now know is we can recruit all over the United States for our reimbursement team, which is one of our largest employee teams or functions in the company. We manage the reimbursement on behalf of the patient for the home care device that we provide. So we can have people wherever it makes sense to have them now. Now that presents issues of how do you acclimate people, train, how do you help them become part of the culture? Haven't figured that out yet, but we will. But I'm really excited about the opportunity to recruit quality professionals throughout the United States versus a 35, 40-mile radius. So that's going to be spectacular. Yeah. So we won't need very much brick and mortar. I mean, because our shareholders would say, why aren't you located in the Twin Cities? That's where you should be. And I'm going, gosh, there are trade-offs there too, but now we don't. We can stay here and we can still expand.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's gonna, we're gonna vary by segment, right? So probably for our manufacturing and operations team, probably not as much change ahead for them. I mean, again, they've got to be on site and manufacturing, right? I think for our commercial teams, I think what we'll see is a continued use of virtual for consults, for education purposes, for training purposes. I think all of that, kind of virtual medicine, virtual health will continue to get leveraged. And so you'll probably see, who was already kind of in a dispersed environment, less travel in general, but a continuation of that. I think really where the most changes are going to come is probably from our core business units, right? From our functions, from our office and site workers, where I think you're going to see more of a fluid office environment. So smaller footprints probably, but maybe more of them in a dispersed fashion. But you're going to see people that aren't going to be as dedicated to one particular office, but maybe designated in some way, right? So they can do kind of more of a mobile stopover versus a, hey, I'm there, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day type of environment, right? And like Kathleen said, I think it expands the universe for us in terms of where jobs can get done from. And then obviously from that translates directly to where we can recruit from as well. And I think all of that will have an enormous impact on, the entire business.
I would add, I think our team's certainly seen the benefit and some of the efficiency of virtual working. And so I think we'll always have a certain percentage or a certain orientation towards doing that and thinking more about it intentionally as it's efficient for different, roles or for different individuals or different weeks or different days of the week. And that'll be important for us. But I do see us eventually, when it makes sense, co-locating to a certain degree. And I think that's driven in part by sort of the collaboration and the benefits of that for the kind of work we do. We talked about challenges earlier. I think a challenge we sometimes have is in this kind of two-dimensional world, it can be really hard to read body language, or it's even hard to pick up if someone's having a bad day or if someone's burned out or, there's other things going on. It takes more work and it's hard to sometimes have to communicate that yourself when, really others maybe can pick up on it and help you through something. And so I think those advantages of being in person, and again, ours is a little bit different. We're not 80 locations around the globe, so it's a little bit different scale. So, but I think, the team's looking forward to potentially doing that when it makes sense and when people feel safe. But we'll always have, I think, continue to have a much stronger virtual orientation for sure as a critical element in what we do.
You've all alluded to, the mission-driven, the patient centricity of your organizations, and Kathleen mentioned some of this exposure. We're not as engaged as we thought we were. Well, I think that can be true, even though all of our organizations in healthcare talk about the patient every day. There are moments when you're incredibly tied to the patient and that work more so than others, and this is certainly one of those moments. So you've all alluded to that mission driven, but how important has it been? How big of a driving force for all of you to work through this pandemic has been all of your employees getting even more reconnected with the mission of the organization?
I'll jump in. I think for us, it's been, hugely instrumental. I mean, it was brought up a couple times earlier on the call. Kind of finding that common ground that, call it the North Star, whatever. I mean, for us, it has been the patient because that's common to all of us. It's a very visible, very symbolic. People can feel it, right? And so it's something that we have leveraged, to rally around and keep at the forefront of what we do. And it helps provide us focus. It helps us, make decisions, gives us clarity. And so it absolutely, was always something, pre-COVID, but I think it has gained, even elevated itself, if that's possible, even higher on that, on that plateau.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
Okay. The only reason I wanted to share now is that I have here, and our company has a very similar experience that Matt was describing. We talk with patients daily about their therapy, and we're hearing their concerns around COVID-19. We used to send trainers into every home to train them on our device. So now we offer them an option. Would you prefer a virtual? And some of them are going, oh, I love this idea. This is so much easier for me. I didn't like that you came into my home anyway. So, but we hear what issues they're dealing with. And I think it does motivate the team even more regarding our culture around that mission of helping that patient breathe easier and live better. It just reinforces why they're coming to work and why they want to continue to come to work, even though it may be remotely. And it just continues to coalesce us with that common mission. So I'd say it has elevated that need, and particularly because COVID-19 is a respiratory related disease, there are some concerns about how we can help this patient population during the pandemic.
I think our being able to come around as a mission in this particular, in this pandemic situation was critical. Our team members have commented a lot on that. I think, March, April, May, we built out a whole COVID-19 resource center. So we have, as some of you may know, we have specific programs for depression and anxiety and, social anxiety and substance use. And these are all very comprehensive self-directed programs, and then coaching that's available 24/7 with clinician coaches that are available to all of our members. And that was already in flight, but what wasn't was COVID-19 specific material around anxiety for high rates of change, this thing called caution fatigue, fear of the unknown. And so in that short period of time, we built out actually mini programs for a free resource center for everybody, for members and non-members to be able to access, while launching about 2 million more members in that same time frame, adding over 100 clients, all in that 3-month, and trying to hire. And so as difficult as that was, our team commented a lot that, we're pretty fortunate that we had this monumental task to focus on, because it helped us focus our time and gave us real purpose during a really difficult time for all of us. I mean, we one day we're in the office, the next day, the email goes out and we're all staying home. And so I think we were very fortunate that we could really focus our efforts. But the flip side is then now, since that we're sort of in a steady state, it's sort of unwinding some of that so that we can find that balance.
And Matt, I do want to follow up on one thing you mentioned earlier. You're talking about the employee experience, which is changing. You talked about protecting it, but I also hear you talking about evolving that employee experience. So I want to start with you and ask everybody to join in as they see fit. But what are the improvement opportunities in that employee experience that Medtronic has prioritized, right? So not everything, but what are some elements of that experience change that you really see as positive?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to our framework, in the very beginning, where we really did prioritize, the health and well-being of our employees and their families as a top priority, right? So I think employee experience was something in general that we talked about. We certainly had programs around it. But I think, again, it was something that was elevated in terms of, as we lead through this, this has to be at the forefront of, the decisions that we make, the debates that we have, and what does it mean for our employees? And so I think that was kind of the step one. And from there, there were always trade-offs, right? I mean, we had to, take away from some programs to invest and fund others. We took the approach of, hey, let's look at our employee base as a whole. And what are the greatest needs that will impact the most amount, right? And so we set up specific programs like emergency leave and child care stipends and just, various support mechanisms to make sure that, again, they were taken care of going through this. I think also just, helping them set and establish themselves, transitioning from an office environment to the home environment, was key. So how did our employees experience that? And again, what was the support the organization was going to give them? And then I think there's just, other just kind of core leadership things too that aren't necessarily programmatic, but what is the kind of overarching philosophies around the workday, right? And how do we protect that? And a lot of that came through just simple messaging. I mean, I know I started a kind of a weekly series it was very basic around, hey, here's what other employees are doing to, quote, survive, right? But just sharing and sharing stories. And part of that was not just about the actual, here's some kind of tips and tricks, but also to help people stay connected and, have that connected tissue across others and continue to encourage that, kind of, I don't call it family, but the closeness that the organization can experience in an office environment that maybe is a little bit harder in a virtual environment.
Well, I think from an employee experience, how it is evolving, I think it's evolving in continuing to keep them safe and well, and that is number one. And I do believe we continue to learn on how best to do it from wearing masks at work in meetings to, oh, maybe we could transition to face shields and that would make it more comfortable if we're in meetings and we're still social distancing. It sounds like a very minor thing, but what can we do to help people be more comfortable and still have that face-to-face interaction if possible? We provided a discretionary bonus to our employees because on one hand, we froze our merit increase that usually happens in July, and then provided them a bonus because there were things that they may need and it would help through other issues that they may be experiencing with their family or daycare. Something that I think we're going to consider going forward would be a home care, if you're working remotely, a stipend. So you can buy a great office chair that reinforces your lumbar or can give you a little more privacy. I think those are really important ways that we can involve the employee experience. And then we're still having a little trouble with people all using video when we're having meetings. And I think we have to continue to reinforce why that makes sense and why that's going to be beneficial for you and beneficial for the team and for us to continue meeting our mission overall. So those may be very minor things, but I think it is the little things that count right now, and listening to every employee and what they may need to help make this work better for them. My biggest concern about the evolving employee experience is when we bring on new people. If we're bringing on new people, which we've continued to hire throughout the pandemic, how do you acclimate them to the culture when a new leader can't really get their whole team together and talk to them and start building that relationship of trust? So we're going to have a lot more to do on onboarding and orientation of new employees and new leaders going forward. We'll figure it out, I'm sure. But right now, I don't know that I have a simple answer for how we're going to continue to evolve the employee experience along those lines.
Well, there's certainly nothing simple for any of us in operating in this environment. I notice we're just about out of time. I really want to thank all of you for coming on, sharing your experiences, your expertise, just sort of pulling down the veil and being honest about what we're all struggling with. Great comments today. It is the little things that matter. There are big things that matter. I look forward to, doing this again with the three of you in 3 months or 6 months or a year as we, continue to evaluate the lessons learned and see how we're all working. But I know everyone's figuring it out on the fly, and I appreciate the three of you spending your time to help others. And I really appreciate the example you're providing. Each of your companies, I wanted you guys here because your companies are fantastic. You're making a real difference as you have all the time, but in particular during this period of time, and thought your insights would be wonderful for our audience. So I want to thank you all for your time and attention. And again, for everybody watching, please go to our website, medicalalley.org, where you can continue to find this webinar and coming webinars where we're tackling both the big challenges of healthcare during the pandemic, as well as what we're all dealing with as friends and neighbors and employers. Visit us anytime at medicalalley.org. Thank you for attending today. Thanks again to our panelists, and I'll wish everyone a safe and healthy Medical Alley Day.